the city of Jerusalem began to awaken. The sky, tinged with the first rays of a pale sun, cast long shadows across the narrow, dusty streets. The air was still cold, but the movement in the alleys indicated that a new day was beginning, a day that would forever be marked in history. In the high priest's palace, Caiaphas and the elders of the Sanhedrin were already up, eager to finalize what they had started during the night. The sentence had been given: Jesus was guilty of blasphemy and should die. But there was a problem. The Sanhedrin did not have the authority to impose the death penalty. That power belonged solely to the Romans. For their sentence to be executed, they needed the approval of the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. The Jewish leaders, accompanied by a group of guards and temple soldiers, led Jesus through the streets of the city. His face was marked by blows, his eyes carried the weight of a sleepless night, but he walked in silence. His dignity contrasted with the fury of his accusers. As they passed through the market, some people began to gather. Whispers ran through the crowd. Some looked on with disdain, believing he truly was a blasphemer. Others, however, saw his state and felt a lump in their throats. The one who days before had been hailed with branches and songs now walked shackled like any common criminal. Peter, who still hid in the shadows, watched from afar. His eyes were red from weeping. He wanted to scream, wanted to do something, but he had no strength. The weight of his betrayal crushed him. Judas also wandered the streets, tormented. He had learned that Jesus had been condemned, and now it was too late to turn back. His silver coin seemed to burn in his hands. He wanted to undo what he had done, but there was no escape. Pilate's Praetorium was located in the Antonia fortress, an imposing Roman barracks that dominated the landscape of Jerusalem. It was a symbol of imperial power and foreign occupation, a constant reminder that the Jews were under Roman rule. The religious leaders stopped before the entrance, but did not dare cross the threshold. It was the eve of Passover, and according to their laws, entering the residence of a Gentile would render them unclean, preventing them from participating in the rituals. "Go tell Pilate we have an urgent case for him." The soldier obeyed, disappearing into the interior of the Praetorium. A few minutes later, Pilate appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing his official toga. He was a man with a cold expression, accustomed to dealing with rebellions and conflicts. His gaze swept over the crowd until it fixed on the prisoner they brought him. "What do you want from me so early?" "We have brought this man. He is a dangerous criminal and must be condemned to death." Pilate raised an eyebrow. He had heard of this Jesus. He knew he was not a violent leader, but rather a preacher. His name had been mentioned a few times among the reports of the city. The governor sensed that something was amiss. "If he is a criminal, judge him according to your laws. We have already judged him, and he is guilty. But we do not have permission to execute anyone. Only Rome can do that." Pilate sighed. It was clear to him that these men did not want justice, but rather to rid themselves of a problem. He looked again at Jesus. The prisoner was not terrified, did not plead for his life. He simply stared back with a serene gaze, as if he were there by his own choice. The governor took a deep breath. He knew that the decision he would make that day could change the course of events. And so, with the fate of a man in his hands and the weight of politics on his shoulders, Pilate ordered that Jesus be taken for interrogation. The sun was high in the sky when Pilate, governor of Judea, found himself at an impasse. Before him stood Jesus, a serene man with a deep gaze, who showed no signs of fear or despair. On the other side, the religious leaders, impatient, pressed for a condemnation. The courtyard of the Praetorium was crowded. Priests, elders, and scribes were huddled together, murmuring among themselves. The atmosphere was tense. Pilate, an experienced politician, immediately sensed that this was not a simple matter of justice. Something deeper was at play. "What charges do you bring against this man?" The priests exchanged glances. They had to be careful. If they claimed that Jesus was guilty only of blasphemy against God, Pilate would not care. But if they framed the issue as a threat to the power of Rome, perhaps they could achieve the sentence they desired. This man has declared himself king of the Jews and incited the people against Caesar. Pilate raised an eyebrow. King of the Jews? That was indeed a serious accusation. If Jesus was truly claiming a throne, he could be considered a rebel, an insurgent, and Rome did not tolerate insurrections. Has he led any revolt? Gathered armies? Attacked any fortress? The priests hesitated. Jesus had never taken up arms, never instigated a rebellion against Rome. He disturbs the people with his teachings. He says we must serve God above Caesar. Pilate sighed. It was clear that these men were not concerned with Rome, but with their own religious authority. If Jesus were a real threat, the Roman soldiers would have already dealt with him. The governor looked directly at Jesus. Something about this man intrigued him. His silence, his calm. He did not seem like a criminal. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus lifted his eyes and answered, without hesitation, are you asking this on your own, or did others say this about me? Pilate was taken aback by the response. Most prisoners would plead for their lives. But Jesus? He seemed in control of the situation. Am I a Jew? Your own people and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done? Jesus then spoke with impressive serenity, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my followers would have fought to prevent me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. But now, my kingdom is not from here. Pilate pondered. This man spoke of a different kingdom, something he had never heard before. So, you are a king? You say that I am a king. I was born and came into the world to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate frowned. Truth. What was truth, after all? He, a man accustomed to political games, knew that truth was often shaped by interests. What is truth? The silence that followed was almost palpable. The priests began to grow impatient. Pilate was hesitating. They needed to pressure him. He made himself equal to God. This is blasphemy. If you do not condemn him, you are against Caesar. The crowd began to stir. Pilate realized he was running out of options. He saw no guilt in Jesus, but he also did not want a riot in Jerusalem. And so, trying to escape this political trap, Pilate made a decision that would forever change the course of history. The courtroom of the Praetorium was immersed in a tense silence. The Roman governor Pontius Pilate observed the man before him. Jesus, serene, stood there, unchained, unafraid. Outside, priests and members of the Sanhedrin murmured, anxiously awaiting a verdict. Pilate, accustomed to judging violent criminals, did not see in Jesus a dangerous man. He had dealt with insurgents, thieves, rebels trying to challenge the power of Rome. But this prisoner was different. He did not plead, did not show fear. He was simply there, as if he had chosen this path. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus lifted his eyes and calmly replied, are you asking this on your own, or did others tell you this about me? Pilate frowned. That was not the expected answer. For the first time, he felt that it was not he who was interrogating Jesus, but rather the opposite. Am I a Jew? Your own people and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done? Jesus, remaining calm, answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my being handed over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from here. Pilate took a deep breath. Once again, that answer unsettled him. He had heard many men claiming grand titles, but Jesus spoke of a kingdom that did not involve weapons, armies, or politics. So, you are a king? "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." The governor fell silent for a moment. To bear witness to the truth. What did that mean? He, a man shaped by the pragmatism and political intrigues of Rome, had heard many versions of the truth. Pilate stepped closer and gazed into Jesus' eyes. Then, almost as if speaking to himself, he murmured, "What is truth?" The silence that followed seemed to fill the entire room. The question hung in the air, laden with a weight that transcended politics or law. Jesus did not answer. He did not need to. The truth was there, before Pilate. But the governor, wrapped in his own doubts and fears, did not perceive it. Outside, the impatient crowd began to stir. Pilate sighed. He knew that this trial was not about justice, but about religious and political interests. If he refused to condemn Jesus, he could provoke a riot. If he condemned him, he would be sacrificing an innocent man. And then, without waiting for a response, Pilate turned and left. The fate of Jesus was slowly being sealed. The morning sun was already illuminating the walls of Jerusalem when Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, stepped out of the praetorium to face the religious leaders and the restless crowd. He had already interrogated Jesus, and something inside him told him that this man was not guilty of any crime against Rome. Pilate was not a naive ruler. He had dealt with countless rebels and pretenders to the throne. Since being appointed to govern the province of Judea, he had learned that the Jewish leadership had their own internal disputes and often used Roman power to resolve their conflicts. He knew how to recognize a real threat when he saw one. But this man before him? He was not a revolutionary, he was not an armed leader, he did not incite riots. They say you declare yourself king. But your own people handed you over to me. What should I do with you? Jesus remained calm. His gaze was not one of fear, nor of challenge, but of a silent firmness. He already knew what the outcome of this trial would be. Outside, the priests were impatient. The high priest Caiaphas stepped forward. "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate sighed and rubbed his temples. He did not want to get involved in this case. "Then judge him yourselves, according to your law." The religious leaders exchanged glances. The answer was not sufficient for them. Caiaphas stepped forward again. "We do not have permission to execute anyone." That was it. They wanted Pilate to be the executioner. They wanted to use Roman authority to condemn Jesus to death. Pilate glanced at Jesus, who remained impassive, not pleading, not defending himself. The governor sighed deeply. The situation was beginning to feel like a trap. Why were these men, who so hated Roman domination, now begging for Rome to resolve the case for them? Pilate realized that Jesus was not a threat to the empire, but rather to the power and influence of those religious leaders. He crossed his arms and looked back at Caiaphas and the other members of the Sanhedrin. What, after all, is the accusation against this man? The leaders hesitated. They knew that Rome did not care about purely religious issues. So they began to shape the accusation in political terms. He declares himself the Messiah, a king. The word king caught Pilate's attention. He narrowed his eyes and turned to Jesus. If this man was indeed proclaiming himself king, then Rome would have a problem. But Jesus did not resemble any of the self-proclaimed kings Pilate had encountered before. He had no armies, he did not call the people to take up arms, he did not threaten Caesar. The governor realized that there was something more behind that accusation. He needed to find a way out. If he condemned an innocent man, his conscience would trouble him. If he acquitted Jesus, he would face the wrath of the priests and could incite a revolt among the Jews. But then, an idea occurred to him. Perhaps there was a way to escape that situation without making a definitive decision. He knew that Jesus was from Galilee, a territory governed by Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of that region. A slight smile appeared on Pilate's lips. He found his solution. Jesus is a Galilean, isn't he? The priests nodded. Then he belongs to Herod's jurisdiction. Take him to Herod Antipas. Let him decide what to do. And so, with a skillful political maneuver, Pilate tried to rid himself of the burden of that trial. But the story was far from over. The atmosphere around the praetorium grew increasingly tense. The morning sun was already shining on Jerusalem, and the crowd outside the Roman governor's palace was swelling. Governor Pontius Pilate paced back and forth, observing the priests, the leaders of the Sanhedrin, and the silent figure of Jesus, who stood without showing fear or despair. The priests were impatient. They had already taken Jesus to Herod Antipas, but the Galilean tetrarch, after mocking the prisoner and demanding miracles as proof of his identity, had sent him back to Pilate, refusing to give a verdict. Now, the Jewish leaders demanded a definitive answer from the Roman governor. "Governor, we cannot waste any more time. This man claims to be king. If you do not condemn him, you will be complicit in his rebellion against Caesar." Pilate sighed heavily. He had heard that accusation before and knew it was an attempt at manipulation. Jesus bore no resemblance to the political agitators that Rome usually executed. He did not incite the people to rebel, did not arm armies, did not directly challenge Caesar's rule. But the priests knew how to pressure him. Pilate was already in a delicate situation with Emperor Tiberius. Any revolt in Judea could mean the end of his position. He needed to act cautiously. "I have interrogated him and found no guilt in him." Herod also saw no reason to condemn him. "Why do you insist on this?" The high priest stepped forward, pointing at Jesus. "He does not deny being the Messiah, a king. If you allow him to live, you will be betraying Caesar." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Pilate realized that the situation could spiral out of control. The leaders of the Sanhedrin were inciting the people. The Roman governor looked at Jesus. The prisoner remained motionless, offering no resistance, not even attempting to justify himself. The accusation of self-proclaiming king could be dangerous. If word reached Tiberius that Pilate was ignoring a potential rebel, his position would be threatened. The issue was no longer about Jesus' guilt, but about maintaining political control. Then, Pilate had an idea. Perhaps there was a way to free Jesus without being held accountable. He turned to the priests and the people. "Today is your festival. And as usual, we release a prisoner for you. Do you want me to release Jesus, who is called the King of the Jews?" The leaders of the Sanhedrin exchanged glances. They could not allow Pilate to release Jesus. Quickly, they began to incite the crowd. "Not this man. Release Barabbas to us." The name echoed among the crowd, and the shouts intensified. Barabbas was a notorious criminal involved in revolts against Rome. He was a violent man, a murderer. But the priests were willing to prefer him over Jesus. Pilate was surprised. He looked at the people, then at Jesus. The contrast between the two prisoners was striking. "And what shall I do then with this one they call the King of the Jews?" The crowd, manipulated by the priests, began to shout in unison, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate felt a chill. He did not want to condemn Jesus, but he felt cornered. He looked at the religious leaders. They would not back down. If he refused to condemn him, they could accuse him before Caesar of being complicit with a rebel. The Roman governor sighed, stood up, and walked to a basin of water. Before everyone, he washed his hands and declared, "I am innocent of this just man's blood. The responsibility is yours." The priests and the crowd shouted in response, "Let his blood be on us and on our children." Pilate hesitated for a moment. Then, with a wave of his hand, he sealed Jesus' fate. Take him away. Have him flogged, and then crucify him. The trial was over. The sentence had been given. Jesus' fate was sealed.